Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 6th White House Tweetup. We're so excited to have you. We have about 150 tweets here, some from nearby, some from DC, Maryland, and Virginia, lots of you from across the country as far as Texas, Florida, Ohio. In total, you all represent about 20 states, and we're really excited to have you here for the White House Holiday Tweetup. We have educators, teachers, students, tons of people that are just passionate about the intersection of technology and government, lots of you that are just really excited to see the White House all decorated for the holidays. Today you'll hear from a range of White House staff, from the chief technology officer to the pastry chef, from White House economist to the White House florist. So we have a great lineup. We hope you enjoy it. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tina Chen, Assistant to the President and the Chief of Staff to the First Lady.
Well, thanks, Corey, and welcome to the White House. We are especially delighted at this holiday season to welcome all of you. I have a confession to make, which is Corey is my guidepost to things like tweet-ups, as is my 15-year-old daughter. So I'm one of those who's sort of a little past this age, but we have seen the power of what you do. The First Lady did her tweet up around the garden a few months ago, which was terrific. And we're really, really excited to be able to share with all of you, and then for you all to share with the rest of the country the terrific decorations that we have and the theme, and really we hope the spirit behind the holiday presentations that we have today. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview, but you're going to hear from more people like Brad Cooper, who runs our Joining Forces initiative for the First Lady, and other folks who've been involved in it. But our theme, and you will get a copy of this booklet when you go over, is Shine, Give, Share. We have to thank students from the Corcoran School of Art and Design across the street for the development of this booklet, and all of the 85,000 visitors who we expect through the house this month will receive copies of this. This gives a little bit of the detail of the theme and some of the information about the different rooms and what's going on. Shine, Give, Share really is to convey that idea that this is a season to sort of shine forth with all the glitter and the decorations and the spirit of the season, but to also to share it with others that you love and to give back to them and to our community. A particular theme of ours and a particular initiative both of the First Lady and of Dr. Biden and really the entire administration has been our military service to our service to our military family members and service members who serve the rest of us so well. And you will see that theme throughout the house. In particular, we're very proud of the Gold Star tree. When you first come in the East Landing, that's a particular area the last several years where we've had an ability for people to leave notes and write notes, be interactive with what's happening with the displays. This year, it is a Gold Star family tree. For those of you who don't know, Gold Star families are those who have lost a loved one, a service member, in service of our country. And the Gold Star Family Association actually worked with us in designing the elements of that part of the house. And so you will have a tree there. People who are Gold Star families have the opportunity to actually write their name of their loved one on a ceramic star that is hung on the tree. And you will also see a video presentation that's on a continuous loop next to the tree that talks about and shows pictures of their loved ones that were submitted by the Gold Star families. As you proceed through the rest of the house, one of the things to do as you look for it is it's sort of our version of a little game. It's called like Where's Bo instead of Where's Waldo. There are several Bo topiaries of varying sizes, from the about 3 times the realistic height to about this size, scattered throughout the house. I think every room has at least one bow of some sort, made from different materials, including, watch out for the bow made of trash bags. So you will find that. And then the military theme is also carried through our main tree in the blue room. The blue room is traditionally where the largest tree in the house is at, and that tree was decorated with the assistance of Blue Star families being families that have a service member in active duty right now. And you'll see decorations that represent all of the branches of the military, and in particular also cards that were submitted. We have thousands of cards in response to our request from children of military service members who wrote cards and greetings to their loved ones, to their mom or dad, or their other, military family member who is in service. And those cards are decorated throughout the tree. You'll see, I think the numbers on it, we had about 136 volunteers from across the country, people who really just give up the end of their Thanksgiving Day holiday to come here on Thursday night and spend day and night for the next 5 days decorating the house. So they have basically from Thursday till Wednesday to get everything that you will see up throughout the house up and running. It's 37 Christmas trees, 5 bow topiaries, 400 pounds of gingerbread and chocolate that make up the White House gingerbread house, and approximately 85,000 visitors who will come through the house. So we hope you will enjoy it and you really share that kind of spirit of this really being the people's house, and the themes that the First Lady hopes that everyone enjoys. We had a terrific session with our press preview last week where children of military family members came in and participated in hearing together with the press the unveiling of the decorations. And then they got to decorate Bo cookies and got to see Bo himself, which was a little bit of an extra treat as well. Corey asked me to talk briefly, too, about just really what the First Lady has been doing and her initiatives over the year. You'll hear, I think, in more detail from Brad about Joining Forces, which is the initiative she and Dr. Biden launched in April of this year to support our military family members. For the last 2 years, she has also worked on something called Let's Move, which I hope many of you have heard about. This is her effort to really end childhood obesity in a generation. 1/3 of our children in the United States now are either obese or overweight, and it's something that contributes to preventable diseases throughout their lifetimes, heart disease, diabetes. There's a whole level of just unhealthy results that come from being overweight or obese. And if we can teach our children to eat healthy, to exercise, those are traits that will be lifelong for them. They'll pass along to their children. It's remarkable when you see the study, and we have a study from the Childhood Obesity Task Force that is the foundation work for what the First Lady and the rest of the administration is doing on these issues. You see there's like a hockey stick chart. It was startling to me the first time I looked at it. This was not a problem until about the mid to late 70s when all of a sudden it shoots up. We were at about a 5% rate of overweight and obese, and all of a sudden, it's really just in the last 30 years, the last generation that has taken such a remarkable trend upwards, and it's something we can reverse, and we can do this working together across the board with schools and parents and food companies and stores. We've got some great initiatives that have been announced, like Walmart and other, Safeway and other stores putting more healthier options into their grocery stores, going into food deserts. Restaurant companies like Darden, who has the Olive Garden, who've changed their kid menus to get rid of soft drinks and French fries as the default for kids' menus, and schools who are putting salad bars into their schools, who are starting gardens, who are really implementing. We had 1,000 people from school systems and schools across the country here in September on the lawn to celebrate their initiatives as being part of the Healthier U.S. Schools initiative through the USDA. To really individual parents and kids taking responsibility for themselves. The First Lady spoke last week at the first ever Partnership for Healthy America Summit here on childhood obesity. And she told a story of a letter that she received from a 15-year-old girl named Samantha from Connecticut, who just on her own wrote to the First Lady to talk about how she had been unhealthy, she'd been overweight, how she reached out to her school health teacher, who then got her started in soccer, and how her own self-esteem and self-confidence built as she got healthier, and how she now wanted to be a spokesperson. She sort of wrote and said, how can I tell my story more? And she got to do it in a pretty powerful way because the First Lady put her in her speech last week and really kind of got that out and around. But that was just, one child, one teacher, one life really changed. And as we do that one child at a time, I think the First Lady, thinks that this is something that will really benefit to our entire country as we sort of reverse this trend. And then we have Joining Forces as well, and I hope, as you go through the House, as you see what we're doing here in the administration today, that you will be able to share that with all of your followers. And, are we taking questions, or I'm happy to? Yeah. If anybody's got a question, right there in the back.
Sure. You mentioned that it takes 5 days right after Thanksgiving to actually set up
Good question. Well, we started planning the theme of this and really going through some of the ideas back sort of late spring into the summer. It takes that long. It's a little hard to sit there in April and think about Christmas, but you do. That's a really good. You do have to in terms of setting up the theme and then really starting the process of doing the design work.
Just a quick follow-up. The president and Mrs. Obama also, they approved, they do approve it one thing, they approve it multiple things.
They actually, the First Lady in particular takes pretty good, strong interest in selecting the theme. All right, okay, right down here in front.
Yeah, considering, what was the First Lady's, hi. Considering the First Lady's specialization in childhood obesity, what was her reaction to the recent successful lobbying efforts to keep pizza as a vegetable in school lunches?
Well, she does not get involved in congressional issues like that, although it's something obviously here in the White House generally through the Domestic Policy Council we've been tracking pretty closely. And I think the overall issue there is the standards that we're trying to promote. And there was an effort to sort of actually undo much of the good work that our U.S. Department of Agriculture is doing in raising the level of school lunches, overall. And so, we're going to keep working on that and keep moving forward on that effort. All right, there's one over here.
Hi, thanks for taking the time to be with us here today. If there is such a thing, what is a typical day like for you?
There's really no such thing. A typical day for me in the White House is, this is starting off with a speaking, engagement like this is not uncommon. We have regular staff meetings, both of our East Wing staff. As an assistant to the president, I participate in the president's senior staff meetings as well. I have a dual hat here because no one in the White House only does one thing. I am also the executive director of the White House Council on Women and Girls. So there's frequently times when I'm doing work on women and girls policy, throughout the administration. We do a lot of both outreach to groups. We do when the First Lady is traveling to a speech. Sometimes I'll accompany her in that. If we are traveling overseas, as we did to Africa in June, a lot of our staff went on that because we had about 25 public events for her in the span of 5 days. So it required a lot of effort to put that together and a lot of planning. And as to the question in the back, everything that we do, I think, for the President and the First Lady requires a tremendous amount of planning, even for a half-an-hour event. And so there's a tremendous amount of work always being done on that front. Plus, as you'll hear from Brad, our staff is constantly working in the areas that the First Lady has focused on with groups and outside organizations. We're a pretty small staff. And in order to accomplish a lot of the things that we want to, we really have to work in partnership with folks like you, really getting the word out, getting people to be active in their own communities on these issues, and to speak out about them is an important part of what we do. Right down here.
What feedback, any, did you get from Malia and Sasha on the decoration? As well as the Let's Move campaign, so holidays.
Well, I can't speak to that. I can't speak to Sasha Malia's reaction to that. But I think we've had lots of kids come through and be very excited about it. So I'll be interested in your reactions as you go through the house and tweet about it.
Hi, you talked a little bit about the Let's Move program. How do you measure the success of the program? What are your metrics?
Well, I think overall, over the long term, the metric is going to be to try to see a downturn in this trend that I talked about the number of kids who are obese and overweight, and there's sort of annual surveys that come out. And we've only been at this 2 years, and the surveys actually don't even go back that far yet, don't even cover that time period yet, so we will see over time. It's a good question, because I think one of the things, as we've been at it now for 2 years, as we head into sort of expanding the strategies we're working on, we've been starting to talk about how do we look back and see which ones of these strategies are really working or not, and it's something we're going to keep working on. So great, thank you. Another gentleman over here.
I know the First Lady had met at one time with Alice Waters in the garden.
Right.
And just wondering, is she still involved or involved at all with the Edible Schoolyard movement?
Well, We're involved with a lot of movements across the board and a lot of grassroots. Actually, we saw Alice most recently this summer. She was participating in a fundraiser, cooked brunch, I think, for a fundraiser the First Lady appeared at in the summer. What I think we've tried to do with the garden is really empower people across the board in a lot of different ways in which people are using gardens, using local foods, using what they're producing, in their own homes, how they're cooking, to encourage the many ways in which people can, eat healthier in their lives and have more access to healthy foods. And so it's really kind of really looking at lots of different ways in which people are doing it and lifting those up.
We can keep Tina here all day with
Right.
the number of questions. So if you'd like to take
One more? There's one more right here.
The White House and the First Lady in particular have been such powerful advocates of health initiatives, and the White House has done things such as going pink for breast cancer awareness and with World AIDS Day. Are there any plans to continue that going forward, such as going red in February for heart disease, since that's such a big issue?
Well, I can speak to that from my former job. my former job before I was the First Lady's Chief of Staff I was the Director of the Office of Public Engagement here, which is the outreach office. And I know sort of all of the many reasons. I think it's red in February, it's blue, for prostate cancer, it's teal for ovarian cancer, it's purple for domestic violence. We've had a whole series of requests for that, and we made a decision last year, sort of looking at all of those requests, and just sort of trying to balance, really what's appropriate for the House, that we would just stick with just two. There are two that have become sort of traditional in the sense that they've been done over a couple of administrations now, and that is the pink in October for breast cancer and the World AIDS Day ribbon that we hang on December 1st. And I think for now, those are just the two we're going to stick with, given then there's just sort of seasonal decoration that happens to the House. If we did it, otherwise, it probably would never be a White House. So I think, is Brad? Yep, okay. Well, thank you very much. Please enjoy your day at the White House, enjoy your decorations, and we will look forward to seeing you again here. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Tina. Now I'd like to introduce Brad Cooper, who's the Executive Director of the Joining Forces Initiative.
I have one of these. Just during Thanksgiving, started off kind of a new tradition and called a military spouse, and I'll talk to you about why she did that. And that was a great event. Surprised a military spouse whose husband is deployed right now, and also kicked off, along with the USO, this great event called Thanks from Everywhere, where you have a chance, if you Google Thanks for Everywhere, you have a chance to go on to a USO Joining Forces site and just send a little note from the area code that you're in, and you can go on there, and there's a little red dot that depicts where all of the people in the country have sent a note from, and it is incredibly powerful. So with that, let me give you just a quick scene setter on Joining Forces in general. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, back in April, the First Lady and Dr. Biden announced Joining Forces, this concept of really rallying the country around military families, veterans, and service members. And when we talk about the country, it's the effort that's already outside of the Department of Defense and the VA. So we're talking about individuals, businesses, communities themselves, nonprofits, philanthropy, faith-based institutions, the whole and mighty capacity of every one of the communities that we live in order to give back to those veterans and service members and families and give them the support, quite frankly, that they've earned. And as we've traveled around the country, there's a pretty unanimous consensus, is that they've earned it. After 10 years of war, you have groups of people who have deployed in unprecedented numbers. If you know someone in the military who's been around for the last 10 years, pretty common to find people who've deployed 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. We met someone just a couple of weeks ago who deployed 12 times, not always for a year, but the ask of this 1% of the country over the last 10 years, and that's who they are. It's 1% of the country fighting for the rest of us, the remainder of us, 99%, has been incredible. So that with that as kind of the underpinning, the First Lady and Dr. Biden rolled out joining forces. And we're focused in 4 areas, and you see some efforts recently in these 4 areas. The first one is public awareness, employment, education, and wellness. Public awareness, if you've been to a movie lately, or if you've been watching TV, any football this last weekend, you may have seen Tom Hanks or Steven Spielberg or Oprah Winfrey in a public service announcement. You've seen the First Lady and Dr. Biden at Game 1 of the World Series. You've seen them down at NASCAR, and you'll continue to see more and more of that as time moves on. And the goal here is to increase the public's knowledge of what is going on with the military and what this group is doing for our country. There was a survey just a few weeks ago that pointed to the fact that 60% of Americans had no impact in their lives over the last 10 years of the war. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of raising public awareness. The other 3 areas we're working we're looking particularly hard in, starting with employment. And we've spent most of our time in this area, particularly because it has been really around the country the subject of most interest, and we got the most feedback initially. Hey, hit employment hard. So we have, and our effort has been engagement with the private sector, and we have seen people, even in the last few months, leap to lend a hand. At the end of the summer, we had about 100 private sector companies engaged in this process. As of last week, we had 1,500, and we're on a trajectory to continue to increase this. In August, the President, in an announcement here in Washington, challenged the private sector to hire or train 100,000 veterans or military spouses by the end of 2013, so about a 2.5-year period. And the reason was, in particular, young veteran unemployment rates, for a very strange reason, were higher than the national average, despite this being an unbelievably creative and innovative and experienced population. So the President said, private sector, let's get energized and hire 100,000 in 2.5 years. So now we're 4 months as of today past that. The private sector has already leaped out and hired 25,000 among these 1,500 companies. In addition to hiring 25,000, they've also committed to hire another 135,000, which is obviously a target that would exceed the President's goal. Fantastic news. So we're going to look to take this great momentum throughout the country on veterans employment and military spouse employment and keep pushing it on. It's an issue that has great bipartisan support. Both the House and the Senate approved a measure that attacks veteran unemployment that the President signed just a couple of weeks ago, 520 to 0. So it clearly is an area that people want to help. And it's consistent with joining forces, where we say, people ask what can they do, and you'll hear the First Lady and Dr. Biden say all the time, do what you do best. And if you're an employer, hire a veteran, or 3 or 10 or 30 or 500, or some people have stepped up and said, we'll hire 3,000. So it really is a great news story that we're going to continue to nurture. We also have groups that are working on education, big education issues like getting 100 universities throughout the country to adopt a curriculum that includes familiarization with issues that military kids would be going through, so that when they're teachers in the nation's public schools, and oh, by the way, the overwhelming majority of military kids go to public schools throughout the nation. They no longer really go to DOD schools in the continental United States, that there's a familiarization in perpetuity and a training in perpetuity of the nation's teachers to understand better the issues that military kids face. Also, an organization called Medscape, great online organization, developed and is continuing to develop military family and veteran-centric videos and education pieces. Some of these actually are valid for continuing medical education. They stood up their site just a couple of weeks ago. It's fantastic. It's a great depiction of what joining forces is. It's people rallying and stepping up and doing what they do best. And in this case, what they do best is helping to train and educate the nation's physicians and nurses. And as of yesterday, 40,000 doctors and nurses had used this site. So I think you can get a sense of those three areas: employment, education, and wellness. That's where we're pushing. We're always looking for new partners, and we're looking in particular for aggregators, big associations that have lots of people that can move this issue in the country. I think that's what I'll leave you with, and happy to answer any questions. Oh, I appreciate that. That was good. Yes, sir.
Four areas, the public awareness, employment, education, is the fourth one wellness?
Wellness. Wellness really kind of focused on two areas. It's military family resiliency, and as we continue to move forward, we'll also see a little bit more emphasis on the First Lady and Dr. Biden addressing the issues of post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury, PTS and TBI, which, as you know, are kind of the signature wounds of this war. We have here's two stats that most of America has no idea about. Nearly 50,000 Americans have been wounded in the last 10 years. Many of these are severe wounds, and you see these on TV. These people are all young. They're in their 20s and 30s, some even younger. So they're going to live for another 50 years where their needs are going to have to be cared for. So this is why we're going to talk about this. And TBI is to a certain extent a little bit of a mystery. We're a lot smarter than we were 10 years ago, but we want to help to better educate the nation, and that's where I think you'll see our effort here in the coming months. Yes, sir.
Any focus on the suicide problem with our military forces and veterans?
This is inherently a DoD and VA effort that the government is leading, but we think that when you start to make the education of the nation, increase the education of the nation on PTS and TBI, that we'll be able to help in that way as well. This is where I think the private sector can step up. And it's also fair to say that the nation in general is unaware of, when you talk to PTS around the nation, most people really don't understand it. So this is where we're going to go, and we think as a byproduct of that, we'll have some inroads into the suicide, which is our position is obviously one is too many, but you've seen some great efforts by DoD and VA at this point. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I read yesterday, I think it was last week in Stars and Stripes, the military spouse unemployment rate is up about 26%. Is there going to be more of a focus on why that is so high? Besides the usual that they move a lot and things like that, but is there a specific, targeting effort?
Yes, so there is a specific partnership that was established over the summer that Dr. Biden rolled out, and we talk about it all the time, called the Military Spouse Employment Partnership. When it was rolled out, it had 72 companies who bought into this idea of, I'm going to hire talent, and the talent pool that they're targeting is military spouses. They're well educated, they're well traveled, they're loyal, they have an incredible ability to be innovative, and they're used to working as part of a team and leading teams. So that partnership, which started off as 72 companies, now is at 96. They have really taken off like a rocket, and they're continually expanding. They have more than 100 more companies who are part of who are in the queue to be part of it, and they all buy into this notion of, we want to get these spouses into a job because, number one, it's good for their bottom line, but they're also committed to the portability aspect so that folks can not just get a job, but retain it as their military service member moves around. So as of this weekend, 8,000 spouses have been hired, which is a huge number relative to 4 months of effort. And I think you'll continue to see more and more of this, and you'll hear the First Lady and Dr. Biden speak about it a lot. It's a big deal. She's had several op-eds about it, saying, hey, employers, just because you have a military spouse who's moved around a lot, that's not a red flag. This is the nature of their life. And let's do some things to accommodate it. Yes, sir.
Does the administration have a goal or a position on federal hiring of veterans?
Yeah, absolutely. The federal government actually has done a tremendous job. In the last 2 years, there's been more than 100,000 and more than 100,000 hired into the federal government. So the government has made this a priority as well. That effort started a couple of years ago, and the agencies of the government have really stepped up. So it kind of speaks to the broader strategic piece of, you have the federal government leaning into it. I know that you have states and at the local level leaning into it, and now you have the private sector pushing hard. And clearly, the capacity of the country lies in the private sector. So this that key third dimension that's really getting some good momentum. Great question. Yes, sir.
I recently heard that forces used to be protected against losing their house for foreclosure, but recently many have lost
lost their houses. Is the White House doing anything to try to help them, or are there any future programs for that?
There are a whole host of folks who are aware of this and looking into it, and in many cases already taken action. You have Mrs. Holly Petraeus, the wife of General Petraeus, who works for the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, who is all over this issue, doing a great job, and I think you're going to continue to see her more and more engaged in this. She travels around the country speaking about this. Her organization is looking into it, and past looking into it, they are attacking it and doing really a great job. One more? Yeah, one more. In the back.
Since military issues for family and service members is so important across the board, we work at the Red Cross, and we were happy for you guys to come out last month and participate in our program. Just out of curiosity, about how many requests do you get on a daily basis for participation in programs, either for you, Mrs. Obama, Dr. Biden?
That's a great question. An enormous number. More than any of a few of us that can possibly do. And that's where that kind of goes back to this. We're always looking for aggregators and people who can independently operate and step up and are operating in one of those three lanes of either employment, education, or wellness. Because the one data point I can give you is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I sat down and said, hey, let's take a look in the next couple months of the invitations, and there were about 175 of them through the end of February. So a lot, which signals people want to help. In many cases, they just don't know how, or they're looking for a little nudge. And what we always do is say, go to the Joining Forces website. You can go to the commitments page. You can go and take a look at where service opportunities are, and I can guarantee something is there for you to lend a hand. And do what you do best. Okay? Great. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Brad. Now I'd like to introduce Macon Phillips, the Director of the Office of Digital Strategy.
All right, thanks. Do I need that mic or this mic or? Let's go handheld.
Go handheld?
What's up, Washington? Before I start, because it's often easy to forget, but we should just give a round of applause to Casey and Corey, who have done an incredible job putting this all together and getting you guys here. It's really. So I work on the team with them. It's called the Office of Digital Strategy. It used to be called the Office of New Media. Who knows what it'll be called next year. But basically, we are a little group that hasn't really existed at the White House before. And it started when the president was sworn in 2009. And we think about three things with our job. I'll give you a quick overview of those things, how we approach that problem, and then just dive right into questions, because I found that's usually more productive and interesting than me sitting up here and talking for a while. But the three goals that we think about are amplification, openness, and participation. Amplification is really about making sure that we're getting the president's message out as technology changes how and where people get information. So we're sort of beyond newspapers and evening newscasts now. People are getting it from everywhere. They're getting it from their friends. They're getting it from blogs. They're getting it from just a whole host of sources, and we want to make sure that we have relationships with those sources and that we're actually getting content and information out to them. The second thing is openness, which I think kind of gets at the idea of being a transparent administration, helping achieve the president's commitment to transparency and good government. But more generally, it's looking at the responsibility we have in an age where people can just Google to find information and come to our website really expecting that they're going to be able to get information about issues. And not just putting out information in sort of wonky reports, but actually thinking critically about how we can boil a lot of this content down to digestible things that regular people can understand, in fact, that they might actually appreciate and share. So that means looking at rich media, developing videos about issues, developing blog posts, all sorts of things like that, to really try to get information out, but also make it accessible as people find it from us. And then the third piece, which is the most exciting but has been the biggest challenge for us, is participation. So how do we actually use our technology platform to create meaningful opportunities for people to be able to participate in their government? Because after all, that's sort of the point of this whole enterprise. And so that, to us, is something we think about every day. We've had some success with that, mostly sort of online Q&As, giving people a chance to sort of ask questions of policy officials. But more recently, we've launched a project called We the People, which we think is a really exciting step forward into that area as well. How many people here know about We the People? Okay, all right, that's good. That's more than last time. So just very quickly, We the People is a new feature at whitehouse.gov where anyone can create a petition, and if they get enough people to sign it, the White House will issue an official response. And we've already seen over 1 million people create an account on the system, and we've answered, I think, 30 some odd petitions, and we have quite a few left to answer. And it's been a whole new way of working here at the White House, and we've certainly addressed some issues that we probably wouldn't have otherwise addressed. And so we really feel like we're able to understand what matters to people and address the issues directly. So those are our 3 goals. The way our team is organized to sort of achieve those goals on a day-to-day basis into 4 competencies. Our first is our content team. So those are the folks that are looking at writing for the website, developing videos, graphics, and that sort of thing. The second is our engagement team. They're the folks that are looking at how we respond to input, making sure that we're able to process that input and get it around the White House to the right people. The third is outreach. So they're the team that is based on this joke that I tell at every one of these, that the only person who has whitehouse.gov as their homepage is my mother. And understanding that people are going to other places online to get information. We recognize that. Our website's a really important asset, but it's not the starting point for every American citizen. So we want to actually go to the communities where they're getting information. The simplest example is during the fight around the Affordable Care Act and getting that passed, we did a lot of work with WebMD to try to find people as they were in the context of thinking about healthcare and thinking about those choices and those situations, and making sure that we had a presence there to engage them on the issue. And then the final group is our platform group, which is really sort of the technology and graphic design group that has a relationship with a whole other office here at the White House that does the straight up software engineering and development. Governments are really good at having a bunch of different offices with a bunch of different acronyms to do the simplest things. So that's how we liaise with them. So that's the structure of our team. Those are our goals of our team. And I'll give you a little bit of my background just really quickly, just because it's very pertinent. I'm from Alabama. We just found out that we're going to be playing LSU in the national championship. This is a really big deal, right? So, yeah, I hope. I'm still not sure whether I thought the last game was good or bad. It was just sort of a thing. I just couldn't get my head around it. But so that's my background. So I'm from Alabama originally, but became an AmeriCorps Vista in 2004, 2003, which really turned me on to politics. I didn't study politics in college, but really got engaged in sort of social justice issues right around the same time that we were going to war in Iraq, and really became engaged in this, and got to know a couple people that are on the Dean campaign, and had a bunch of the conversations when people were realizing, yeah, you could send an email and actually raise money. How is that going to change things? And saw a lot of that from the inside, although I was never on the campaign. One of my friends came down here to start a consulting firm called Blue State Digital around this idea that political campaigns would be interested in using the web on a day-to-day basis. Had a lot of work, called me up and said, I got more work than I can shake a stick at. Turns out no one knows what they're doing with this. It was before YouTube, it was before Facebook, before Twitter. We were trying to figure out how you actually post a video to the internet. That was 2005, and got the opportunity to come join the campaign in Chicago, which was a real thrill. No matter your politics, I highly recommend getting involved with a political campaign of some sort at some point if you're interested in this line of work generally, because it's just amazing how quickly things move, how quickly good ideas rise to the top, and how nimble an organization can be. That was a very exciting time. And then we won, and sort of like, oh wow, what do we do now? And the next day, so you get the speech on a Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, I was back in the office launching change.gov, which we ran for a few weeks. And then we came here. And when the president was getting the oath of office, I was across the street managing the relaunch of whitehouse.gov, which was really kind of fun. And then my first day of work, I ran against the crowds to get in here and right into this building, not quite sure what I was going to do, but 3 years later, here I am. And we've built a really great team. So in addition to Casey and Corey, we have people who have all sorts of backgrounds. We have some folks from New York who are doing really interesting graphic design work. We have people who've been at think tanks here in DC for a while and really understand the issues and understand how to translate sort of the wonk talk to regular people. And we've got some people that I worked with in the past who saw the way online advocacy worked and didn't work in 2005 and really saw an opportunity to come into the institution and figure out how we could take a step towards that activism and really engage it in a more meaningful way. So it's really great to work here. We work with just an amazing group of people. Obviously, the president, the vice president are just really powerful figures, but there's also sort of the senior staff and the middle management here are just really exceptional people. So it's I feel very fortunate to work here. So with that, I'll just open it up to questions because I'm kind of interested in seeing where we want to take this thing. Let's start with you.
Hi, Nathan. My name is Whitney. I work here in Washington, D.C. I suppose this conversation actually relates to exactly what we're encountering here today as part of a tweet up where we can't really tweet at this exact moment. But notoriously, there's been a lot of discussion about how you guys came in and had all these really great, awesome ideas, but maybe had to run to the Starbucks to have a Wi-Fi network that would let you access things like Twitter and Facebook. I know it's also a big issue with social media emergency management ideas and concepts and how effective that's been for folks like the Red Cross and other organizations like Crisis Commons. Could you talk or reflect a little bit on just kind of where you were that first day and where you're hoping to be?
Right. It's a great question. I hope everybody could hear it, but basically it's how difficult is it to work here and how much of those barriers impact innovation. And I think it's a very fair point. You know, we're here in South Court and you can't tweet at our Twitter. That has not been lost on the organizers. Corey mentioned that to me the other day. It's an interesting example because we don't have Wi-Fi here anywhere. We have Ethernet. I don't even know how many people still have Ethernet cables. We do. Yeah. We don't IM each other. We don't use Gmail or any of those other things. And that's kind of frustrating because you really don't want to you want to be able to, particularly in our work, I think, the biggest opportunity is to communicate in the medium that people are already using. You don't want to create a parallel structure where you're asking people to come and engage. And that's just when we want to talk to them about what's important to us or what we think they should care about. But when you get to levels like the emergency management stuff, I mean, it's critical. It's been a huge issue, but we've, in the last 3 years, really improved it. I mean, I remember the first day we weren't able to work from home. And we had BlackBerries, but I couldn't publish web content. And turns out we did the weekly address every morning at 6 a.m. or every Saturday morning at 6 a.m. So I was coming in every Saturday morning at 5:30 a.m. To post a video, and that's sort of where we started. Now we've become much more flexible. So we're able to work from home, able to do work more quickly and more productively. And I think it gets at a larger issue for the White House, and this is one that we grapple with every day, which is how incredibly isolating it is to work here. I mean, you had to go through 2 security checkpoints. It's like going on a plane to get here. I do that every day. There's giant fences and guards that keep people out. And we try to get out of here, but it's not really possible, you know? And even when you do, you're in D.C., which is not, it's a very special place. A lot of good things about it, a lot of bad things about it, but it's sort of unique in the country. And so we're constantly looking for opportunities to really engage people outside of D.C. And that comes back to the real value of our online program, which, how many people are from outside of D.C. here? How many people are from outside the Eastern Time Zone? Right? That's really cool. I mean, this is a start for us. I'd like to see it evenly distributed, but I also recognize people have to fly here and do all these other things to get here. But to the extent we can actually tap into our online program to get perspectives from outside of DC, I think it's a huge benefit for the rest of the building. But it's a constant struggle. How about over here? Go ahead.
Hi. So I used to work in social media for government. Now I do it for a larger corporation. So I'm just wondering, obviously knowing the roadblocks you run into, but what are your rules on replying to people that at you about specific questions that you actually want to respond to, and do you guys have a plan around that?
So we've taken a different posture than I think many agencies, and I'm very sympathetic to the challenges of the agencies. What's unique about the White House is it pretty much has 100% turnover with each administration. We think about it, right? But I mean, there's some administrative staff, there's security guys, I mean, there's all sorts of people who are still here, but on January 20th, 2009, a whole new crew came in, and most of us had known each other from the campaign or knew each other from DC and so forth. So there's a level of sort of collaboration and trust, I think, that is different than the agencies, which are much bigger and much more bureaucratic. So we've been able to really take a posture of, from at least a web content, social media content perspective, go ahead, go forth and prosper, get the content out there, and if you feel uneasy about it, raise it up the flagpole. So Corey just posts things, hey Corey, she just posts things to the White House account as they come up, as they're relevant. The president's going to speak about this, if there's news about that, if somebody asks a question and she knows the answer, you know, she's off to the races. She feels kind of queasy about something, you know, like she's not quite sure or something's, you know, she may, reach out to me. And oftentimes I don't know, so I'll reach out to my boss and so forth. And so there's that sort of level. And I think what that really gets at is this idea that you can very quickly over-process things in social media. The government's really good at that. And what's cool about social media is it's conversational, and you can't have a conversation with someone where, you know, they're like, oh, hey, how are you doing today? Yeah. I'm good, you know, like, it doesn't work that way. And so 90% of the stuff we put on social media is really either derivative of something else we've already publicly said, or just conversational and not that controversial. So having this posture to getting content out makes us, I think, a lot more interesting to the public. At the agency level, they have all of these clearance processes that were born of a pre-internet time when, you know, you had a newspaper go to print and it was in the print and you couldn't get that back. That bullet was fired. And so they're very careful about the kind of content they put out. And to be sure, the issues they deal with are super important. You know, matters of foreign policy, matters of public safety, and so forth. And we've seen some progress, but I think there's a lot more progress to be made at how you actually have that nimble, quick, flexible clearance process in the social media. But it's a new one.
For the record, I am getting a signal here and getting some things out.
All right, so what's your service provider, AT&T or Verizon?
Verizon.
Verizon, okay. There you go. You guys, AT&T, you're out of luck.
Well, you know, at Comic-Con, they make a big joke of the AT&T subscribers there. Anyhow, what would be your the thing that your biggest success, the thing that you're most pleased about?
Biggest success. Well, lately, the We the People thing's just been terrific, and it's a success just getting it out the door and seeing people use it. It's also one of our biggest challenges. I wouldn't use the word failure for it because we're still learning from it, but we're really grappling with a whole host of non-technology issues, more public engagement issues. When you give people the opportunity to tell you what matters to them, what's the reasonable expectation for a response? And is it good enough just to tell them where you stand on it? And how do you show them that it's actually being brought into the process? And more to the point, how do you actually bring it into the process? And I think the progress we've made on that is something I think our whole team is super proud of. But it's incremental, and it's less, as I said, technology-based and more culture-based. You know, how do you actually have a building that is really interested in using tools to get mass public input? Not just the groups in DC who have an executive director or whoever here to represent them and meet, you know, for lunch with people here and have very sort of normal conversations. You know, we're now opening up the White House to all sorts of conversations through all sorts of avenues, and how we process that and bring that into the building is something we've made a heck of a lot of progress at over the last 3 years, but we recognize we have a lot of work to do. And it's really hard to articulate, but I feel really good about that. Yeah. I'll get you next.
I'm a really big SEC fan too, so
Okay.
go, congrats.
Well, wait, so you're not an Auburn fan, are you?
No.
Okay, good. All right.
South Carolina.
Okay.
I know that the campaign and the White House photo team is on Tumblr. I was wondering if the White House had any interest in getting on Tumblr.
We've looked at it. Yeah, we've talked to those guys. And this is sort of falls into Corey and some other folks she works with area. And we haven't yet. And I think it brings up a really good lesson that we've learned. We've learned the hard way at times, which is that it's very easy to open up a lot of presences, right? You can get on Quora, you can get on MySpace, you can get on Tumblr, you can get on whatever the next one is, like in 2 weeks, you know? But you have to really understand why you're doing it. I think that the way I've seen the campaign and other folks use it for storytelling is really powerful, visual, right, that sort of thing. I think we're thinking about how we would actually use Tumblr. And once we get our head around that, there's no reason we wouldn't use it. It's just particularly having constrained resources compared to what we had on the campaign and what other groups have. We really want to focus our energy on what's working, develop that, and then gradually grow, rather than sort of set up shop at a bunch of presences. But you may see that in the next few months, maybe weeks. We'll see, but go ahead.
There has been a huge shift, as you noted before, in terms of how the past governments use the technology infrastructure and leverage Twitter, etc. Did this come up during the campaign, or was any specific person's idea, or was a number of people that came up with this model and reaching out through Twitter, Facebook, and getting feedback from common citizens like us?
I don't think it was anyone's single idea to do this. I think if you look at the history of political campaigns over the last few cycles, the Obama campaign wasn't the first one to use these things. They benefited from the time, because these things, as Twitter and Facebook, as they are now, didn't exist previously. But just the first to use the internet, you have McCain using it, you have Kerry, you have Dean, you have a bunch of these folks trying to figure it out. I think one of the things that made it really different in 2008 was that President Obama was a community organizer at heart. That was his first job. That was his instinct. And more than anyone, he recognized the power or the possibility when you create tools that empower regular people to do extraordinary things together. I think that's the secret to how we won, was our ability to create opportunities for other people, many of whom hadn't been involved in the process before, to get together and drive us to victory. We were just in the right place at the right time, offered the right tools. That is really powerful in a political campaign context. It is altogether more powerful in a governing democratic context. But I think we're an earlier cycle in the governing idea than, say, the Obama political one was, where it had a few previous campaigns to really figure out what set the public expectation of participation, figure out what tools would really work. And we're still trying to figure that out from a governing perspective. But it's less about the specific technologies and more about the ethic that you want to give control to regular people who haven't been involved, and these tools offer a great way to do that. And then where they take it is up to them. Go ahead.
One or two more questions.
Okay, great.
I have a question mostly about the legacy that you as a digital strategist and your team are thinking about leaving behind. I mean, it would be very easy, of course, for a new administration to come in and not do tweet-ups or not do these types of things. Are there any steps that y'all are taking to ensure that the people that you're reaching out to across America are able to do that perpetually in the future?
Not intentionally. It's not like we think, how can we lock this stuff in? I mean, I feel like there are a few projects that are perhaps forgettable and perhaps should be, But there's a few projects that I think are, if effectively done, the types of things that set public expectation, like the We the People thing. As I said earlier, we're still figuring out where this is going to go, how, the public expectations, how to do it right. But I really believe firmly, if we can get it right and set a public expectation that they'll have a mechanism for letting the president know what matters to them, that it'll be very difficult to walk that back. Maybe it'll be easy to replace it with something else. Maybe it's easy to replace it with something that seems the same but is actually not. But those sorts of things are really cemented once the public understands how they work and continues to expect it. The other thing is this stuff's fairly inevitable. I mean, when you look at the sort of changing news media, it's not like that's going to unchange. And so a lot of the things we do are in response to that, to the sort of changing news landscape. So I think any future administration, regardless of the party, is really going to have a team like ours to understand how they can make sure they're communicating with the public, because the public's changing how it gets information and where it gets it from. Just the generational shifts are amazing. So we'll be here in some form, and I think the public engagement piece is really where we can see expectations getting locked and some sort of legacy. All right, so we'll take the last question back here.
You spoke to diversification of platform, but not necessarily to diversity itself. And one thing I've noticed with federal accounts is that there's typically a Spanish language account, and then there's the English language account. For instance, NASA might have well over 1 million people following their NASA account, but only tens of thousands following the Spanish language. Has there been any discussion about integration of content? So a Spanish tweet about the White House Tweetup, something like that?
That's a really great question. We could do a lot better of a job at that, but we do work on it. We approach it from the standpoint, we have La Casa Blanca, which is the White House. That's our Twitter account, and we also have a Spanish language version of our site. We don't just translate the English content wrote to the Spanish language. We do repurpose some of that, but we also try Spanish language content first that we may translate back to English. That's been something that we've heard from folks that they really appreciate, sort of writing in a language first and then just sort of having it available in other languages rather than have a Spanish version of all the English language stuff. But from a resource standpoint, it's very difficult. And so we try to get the most important things that we feel are sort of high level of news out through our Spanish language programs. But right now, it's not at parity. It's not 100% of everything on the English side. We'll see where that goes. It's something we've been beefing up, but as I said, we still have a lot of work to do on it.
Is there anything we as the audience can do to facilitate that?
That's a good question. I mean, take a look at what we're currently doing through those accounts and tell us, what you like and what you don't, what we should do more of. From just translating, make content more accessible, we've looked at some of the models like what TED Talks does, which is really fascinating stuff with a crowdsourced translation, not just for the White House program, but like the State Department. Imagine if the State Department did something and all of a sudden American content was accessible in every language, translated by native speakers. That would be brilliant. That's not happening tomorrow, but seeing it happen at a smaller scale for TED is really encouraging to look at it for a larger scale for the government. And that gets back to the idea of giving citizens a way to participate in their government that's different than just asking questions, getting answers, actually pitching in and helping make government better. That would be a really great project to do, but we're not there tomorrow. But appreciate the instinct. And take a look at what we're already doing in the short term, and you can get in touch with us to let us know. I'll take one more question from the lady in the back who, yeah.
I was wondering, there are so many initiatives and projects and things that the White House does, and how do you streamline what you put out so that the messages don't get muddled and all of the things get confused with one another?
It's a huge challenge. The simple answer is we have sort of a main message that we're pushing. So this week, our focus is really around extending the payroll tax. In addition to that, there's some work that's being done on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to get that director in so that it's beefed up. And you're going to hear a lot more about that in just a second, so I'll let others talk about that. But the opportunity is that in addition to having sort of our national single message that we're focused on, there's a whole host of communities that are passionate about other issues, related issues. And so we kind of have to walk and chew gum. And so there's a number of environmental issues that people are really keyed up on. There's a bunch of foreign policy issues that people are really keyed up on. And the opportunity for us is to not be limited to one conversation at a time, but to actually be able to do a bunch. I think what you get at is when they cross over and someone's coming and they say, oh, they're talking about Iraq, oh, no, they're talking about payroll tax, like what's going on here? Keeping that stuff organized is really important. That's why we like to think we have a site that does that fairly well. But we also are very intentional in our outreach to reach communities that are already talking about these issues and then making sure that we're getting content to them that's relevant and not just sort of spamming them with what we think is important. And it's something that We the People is all about, is a mechanism by which people can self-organize around issues that they care about, and then we're able to respond very efficiently to those specific issues. So we're working on that problem. Very much agree that it's an ongoing challenge. We feel like we've achieved some things to really get at that. I'm going to hand it over now to Corey, but thanks so much for coming in. As I said earlier, it's just great to have people from outside of DC. Have a great day.
Thanks, Megan. I'd like to introduce David Kamen, who is a Special Assistant to the President for Economic Policy.
Hi, it's great to be here. So, as I said, I work over at the National Economic Council, which is the body in the White House that helps coordinate economic policy for the administration. I'm going to start off with an overview of sort of where we are in the economy, sort of the major initiatives that we've got going forward to get the economy going again and to create more jobs. And then we'll, of course, be very happy to take your questions. So, where we are right now is a very, very different place than where we were now coming on 3 years ago. I think it's sometimes important to remember where we started at. When the president took office, the economy was losing something like 800,000 jobs per month. We had suffered a shock in terms of people's net worth that was larger than was suffered going into the Great Depression in 1929. We faced a very, very real risk of a second Great Depression. Because of decisive action that was taken by this administration, we avoided that. We've now seen 2.9 million jobs created over the last 21, private sector jobs created over the last 21 months. We've seen an economy that is growing, and that is a far better place than where we were when we took office, when the economy was on the precipice of what could easily have become a second Great Depression. However, economic growth is nowhere near as strong as it needs to be. When you have an 8.6% unemployment rate, you can't declare victory. It is something that no one here is satisfied with, and we need more jobs right now. The president understands the risks the economy faces. We are growing, but we need to grow faster. We're creating jobs, but we need to create more of them. We also face risks coming from outside this country, such as the financial crisis, and hopefully one that will be resolved, but a potential crisis in Europe that is a headwind to our economy. Those were the reasons why the president, a few months ago, gave to Congress the American Jobs Act. The American Jobs Act was an initiative to try to create jobs right now through a variety of mechanisms. It included a payroll tax cut for all Americans going into next year, extending the payroll tax cut that's in place this year. That's a 2 percentage point payroll tax cut for a typical family making $50,000. That's an $1,000 tax cut. Going into next year, we propose to expand that to 3.1%, which would provide about $1,500 for a typical family. That's right now at issue right now in Congress. We've actually seen votes last week on the payroll tax cut. Now, importantly, President proposed that we think that this payroll tax cut will create jobs. It goes both to middle-class families, also goes to small businesses, because we cut in half the payroll taxes for small businesses. The Senate Democrats had proposed that payroll tax cut be paid for by asking millionaires to pay a little bit more, and that was something we supported. It got over 50 votes, but did not get the supermajority 60 votes needed. It was blocked. And going into the next few weeks, we are making it an absolute priority where we see that passed. We think that when the American people support this, they support the idea that middle-class families going into next year should be getting additional relief. Independent economists say the payroll tax cut that we propose would add about between 600,000 and 1 million jobs next year. It's something that we need to get done in order to both give relief to families and create jobs. Also in the next few weeks, another part of the American Jobs Act will be up for a vote, which is the extension of unemployment insurance. So even as we provide relief to middle-class families through the payroll tax cut, it's absolutely essential that we continue to provide the support to America's workers when they lose a job. Because we continue to see unemployment that is far too high, and we need to make sure that we're providing people who are looking for work, and these are people who are looking for work, the benefits they need in order to make ends meet and give them the support they need while they try to find work. It's important to also note that unemployment insurance is one of the most effective ways to create jobs, because people who receive those benefits then go out and spend it. And so an extension of unemployment insurance next year would create hundreds of thousands of jobs. Now, those are two pieces of the American Jobs Act that I expect will be debated and should be on the table coming up this month. There are a number of other pieces that we are committed to and that we have asked Congress to pass. Those include, for instance, rebuilding America and creating jobs now. So for instance, the American Jobs Act included a $50 billion fund for infrastructure, an immediate investment in America's infrastructure that would go to roads, railways, America's airports. We think that those types of measures, they both, infrastructure is one of the most important things that we can invest in for long-term economic growth, and it also helps create jobs now. So it sort of hits that dual bid. We think it's very important, and we hope that Congress acts on that. There have also been a number of other measures that, unfortunately, so Congress did vote on. They got blocked. We are going to continue to fight for it. So for instance, there was a fund, a $30 billion fund to reconstruct 35,000 schools across this country. That's actually something that we hope will be acted on by Congress soon. There was a $35 billion fund to prevent teachers from being fired next year. That's again something that we think is absolutely essential. That represents an investment in human capital in this country, even as it saves jobs. And we think that that type of measure can be very helpful for both saving jobs right now and getting the economy going again over the long run. Now, importantly, the entirety of the American Jobs Act was fully paid for. And that was something that was important to the president. We understand that we have a long-run deficit problem. It's something that we do need to act on. And the jobs measures that we put in place right now, we thought it was important for them to be paid for. And so the American Jobs Act, as part of that, we proposed a number of measures, including cutting back tax expenditures for some of the highest income Americans, cutting back some of the oil and gas subsidies, cutting back the carried interest loophole that paid for the American Jobs Act. Also, the Senate then put on the table an alternative, which was to impose a small tax on the highest income Americans, those making over $1 million. That was also a fair way to do it, and we supported that. The point is that this bill, in all of its iterations, has been fully paid for. So there is no excuse for not acting on these jobs measures now. It does not add to the deficit over time. Now, even as we face a significant deficit when it comes to the economy, and we need to create more jobs and get people back to work, we also face a significant fiscal deficit going forward. So when we took office, we faced a deficit of $1.3 trillion in the very first year, and trillions of dollars in deficits going forward over the decade. The president is committed to putting the budget on a sustainable course. That's why this fall he proposed a $4 trillion deficit reduction plan that begins reducing the debt as a share of the economy. Now, obviously, in D.C., we haven't agreed on exactly what we should do to balance the budget, because we had a negotiation this summer. We signed into law the Budget Control Act, which was in $1 trillion down payment on deficit reduction. But the president wanted to do more. He wanted the big deal, which would manage to both create jobs now, put in place some stimulus now, and also reduce the deficit going forward. Now, that didn't happen. And again, with the Joint Committee on Deficit Reduction, again, a deal didn't happen. And I think the basic fact of the matter is we are committed to a deal that's a balanced deal, a deal where we see cuts across the budget, but at the same time protects those areas where we need to invest in our future and also protect some of the most vulnerable Americans. And finally, and very importantly, asks the highest income Americans to contribute to deficit reduction, because we think that is an important principle, and we think it's also the only way we're going to put our budget on a sustainable course while at the same time maintaining the core responsibilities of government and investing in our future. Now, that's something the other side isn't willing to do. They've put forward, for instance, in the House budget resolution last spring, they put forward a plan to try to achieve deficit reduction through only spending cuts. And it involved massive cuts to Medicaid. It involved cutting infrastructure by 1/3 over the next 10 years. That was not a vision the president would agree to. We are willing to compromise, but we think that compromise means compromise from all sides and making sure the deficit reduction is a balanced plan going forward. So the immediate thing that we're dealing with right now, the next few weeks, is making sure that the economy going into next year has the support it needs, and that we continue to, that growth continues, and that we continue to support job creation, and that it becomes stronger. That will require passing a payroll tax cut going into next year. We hope expanding that payroll tax cut, and also passing an extension of unemployment insurance, which expires at the end of this year. I think going forward, we're going to continue to have a debate over the budget. And I think you're going to see that we remain committed to making sure that we put the budget on a sustainable course, but we do so in a balanced way. So, and with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Question about the Euro debt crisis. I know that wasn't a consideration back in 2009, but how has it impacted what the administration is doing now, because it's still really not settled?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. So first of all, one of the most important things we can do is act on the things that we have immediately under our control. And one of the reasons the president proposed the American Jobs Act was both because we saw that even right now, the economy is growing, but it's not growing as fast as it should be. We're creating jobs, not creating enough. We also needed an insurance policy, because if the rest of the world was, if the rest of the world didn't manage to get its act together, we needed to make sure that we have in place the measures we need next year so that the American economy is not subjected to a risk of a downturn because of what's going on in the rest of the world. So one of the most important things that we can do is actually act on the things we have control over, and that is the American Jobs Act that the president proposed, the payroll tax cut that they're voting on right now, unemployment insurance that's up at the end of the month. So those are things that we can control. Congress can pass it, the president can sign it into law. That's the first step. Now, obviously, when it comes to the crisis in Europe, we've been very actively involved. The president, Secretary Geithner, have been very actively involved in talking to their counterparts in Europe. And one of the things we think that we bring to the table is our own experience with a financial crisis just a few years ago. Obviously, going into 2008 and 2009, the American financial system was suffering a crisis of its own. And what we did then was not necessarily popular. But it did end the financial crisis and managed to put the economy, give it the stability it needed to begin growing again. And we think that we bring that experience to the table in telling Europe that they do have the resources they need to solve the crisis. It is a question of will and making sure they actually use the resources they have to do so. In 2008 and 2009, we found the will to end the financial crisis here. And it's that experience that when the president and Secretary Geithner are talking with their counterparts in Europe that they're bringing to the table.
I'm wondering what the White House's position is on Occupy Wall Street, and considering that you've been talking about the 1% paying higher taxes, and is there any chance that President Obama might mention the Occupy Wall Street movement in the State of the Union?
So I doubt that given my own position on the economic team, I doubt I'm going to make a fundamental pronouncement on Occupy Wall Street and the administration's position. But what I can say is that, from the get-go, the president and this administration have been committed to the idea that we need an economy that is growing and also growing fairly, where the gains of the economy are shared fairly across the country. So of course, when it came to getting out of the crisis in 2008, 2009, I just spoke about the fact that that it took some somewhat unpopular measures in order to resolve the financial crisis. Now, something that was important and that is often not talked about is we are also committed to make sure that any cost of TARP that remains in the federal books gets fully paid for by the types of institutions that received financial relief. And that's why the president has proposed a financial crisis responsibility fee, which asks the largest institutions to contribute to deficit reduction, fully pay off the cost of TARP, and is actually focused on specifically the types of risk that got us into this financial crisis to begin with. Now we go beyond that. The president also enacted financial regulatory reform, which is meant to be a bulwark against the very type of irresponsibility that got us into this crisis. And so if there's ever any need again to go in and make sure that the types of institutions that impose risk across the economy that they need to get resolved, that the financial regulatory reform makes sure that those banks pay back the full cost. It has a specific measure in there where if you need to put money into the banks then have to pay it back. And beyond just what we're doing when it comes to the banks, as I said, we are committed to the idea that the richest Americans in this country do need to contribute to deficit reduction, that they do need to pay more. That's why the president has said that when it comes to at the end of 2012, the tax cuts for the highest income Americans should expire. That will save $800 billion over the next 10 years. The president has, on top of that, proposed limiting the tax expenditures that goes to the richest Americans by cutting them back by about a third. That raises another $400 billion over the next 10 years. We've also proposed a number of other measures, whether it's getting rid of the carried interest loophole, which goes to hedge fund managers, whether it's getting rid of the loophole that allows private jets to get depreciated faster. All of those measures we have proposed and put on the table. The point is that we agree with the idea that we need to have a fair, that when it comes to getting the deficit down, we need to make sure that we do it in a fair way where we ask the richest Americans to pay more. We're also committed to the idea that economic growth needs to be fair and widely shared across the country.
Maybe got one more question.
Okay. More recently, we've seen the administration sort of step up their aggressiveness in dealing with Chinese fiscal policy. I was just curious, should we continue to expect the administration to take a stronger line towards China on those issues?
I think it's a great question. Obviously we've been speaking with our Chinese counterparts since coming to office, and telling them that it was important to us that the Chinese currency policy change, and we've actually seen some movement on it. We've seen, in real terms, which is sort of the important thing to look at, we've actually seen an appreciation of the Chinese currency relative to the US dollar. We think that's important movement. That's obviously something that's, that continues to remain very important to us as we talk to our Chinese counterparts, because we think that going forward, it's actually in the best interest of the United States and the best interest of China that we come to a, sustainable course, because what we've seen going up till now is not sustainable. It's not good for the US economy if we continue to have the type of current account deficit that we're running against China, and the truth is it's not a sustainable way for the Chinese economy to grow. And so I think we have seen important movement there. I think that it's something that we continue to discuss with them and remains very important to us to make sure that we get on a sustainable path, one where we see fair trade going on between both countries. So I think we've seen progress since coming to office because of the efforts that we've taken, and it's something that we continue to work on with them. All right, thank you very much.